you need your ego to be kept in check. For a race that lasted 90 seconds, I had to write 900 words in 10 minutes. Being manager of Liverpool successfully is like being manager of a small country, and you're the head of state. It's a quite exposing job. You know, you can make a mistake and it's not picked up by the subs, then the world will see that you're a very stupid person. I was not welcomed at all, really. So yeah, I think my favourite thing is
Alyson, you have been a sports writer for, I think it says on your Times bio, about 28 years now. So earlier on, I went and when I was doing my research, 30 years now. Wow.
Yeah.
So when I was doing my research earlier on, I went back on the Times website, over 200 pages, 4,000 articles, and I stumbled upon what seems to be the first one on the online anyway, and it's from the 6th of March, 1995, and it's headlined 9-1 works out to perfection for Ferguson. And the introduction reads, "Suddenly it is all very clear. Manchester United will not relinquish the FA Carling Premiership title on goal difference, and Ipswich Town deserve, indeed need, to drop a division." And it just got me thinking, how much has changed, not only in football terms, from the late 90s, obviously, and the noughties going on, but also in the industry as a whole. And I wanted to ask you personally, as a journalist operating in this space for so long, how has journalism and industry changed since then?
Well, judging from the piece you just read out, not a lot has changed in terms of who are the big clubs and who are the smaller clubs and who has the potential to be embarrassed when they get promoted. That sounds like an intro that could happen this coming season, doesn't it? But journalism, and I mean, the main changes in journalism have been the move away from concentration on print into a digital space, and how at the Times, for example, there's been I've been there to see it be almost an experiment, the move into online readership. And now it's the priority is making sure digital subscribers can get breaking stories throughout the day, throughout the night, that they feel part of a family. And so what we have is a sense that the digital readership is increasing, whilst people who buy newspapers, the number of those are decreasing. But we're still at a stage where we're trying to keep both cohorts happy. So there's still a lot of effort goes into making sure the paper looks beautiful and inviting. And if you settle down with your coffee with a physical copy of the Times, it's a lovely thing to do when you don't feel in any way neglected. But at the same time, a lot of effort is going into making sure you get graphics and insight on the digital platform, and feel like if you access it, several times in the day, you will be rewarded with updates and so on. But whilst also having in-depth reads, so it's just a completely changing world. And I think probably what's interesting in that is, I don't know, when did it start? About 10 years ago, I think journalists were saying, established journalists were saying, "Oh, I'm so glad I'm not starting now, because I don't think I'd be a journalist, because we're not, it's an unsure environment. Our newspaper's dying. Who will be buying paid for writing in the future?" And whilst I do get why some people are nervous about it as a long-term career, so far it is working, because mainly because there's so much rubbish out there for free. How do you determine what you're going to trust, and is that it's going to be reliable in terms of quality? And I think people have largely realized that almost by paying for it, you're sort of giving yourself peace of mind that it's going to be well researched and not just gossip or echo chamber stuff. You've got you've got that ability to know that you can go down the pub or go to the game or do whatever you want to do, knowing that you've got some facts and figures and opinions that have been properly researched. Whereas if you only rely on, well, I don't know, what clicks, things that you can click and so on, that you're not getting a rounded picture. And just to finish on that, I mean, the one reason I like working for the Times is that it does have a breadth of opinion. So you'll get something that's quite establishment, an opinion that's quite establishment, and then you'll get a quite left-leaning opinion. On the opposite page, it covers all bases, because I think it's probably bad for your mental health and your brain to only read one newspaper. But if you only read the Times, you're not getting just one point of view, which I think is lovely.
Yeah, and I honestly agree with everything you've said there. I like to balance it out between reading things online and in the physical form of a newspaper itself, because I actually think it looks better when it's in front of you and it can be easier to read and et cetera, et cetera. But I wanted to ask you, how did you find personally that transition from, when it started to emerge that the digital content was the way forward, and ultimately that is where most of the money is made these days, in the industry as a whole. How did you find that transition, starting to write for a wider digital audience compared to just print week in, week out?
Well, you have more connection with the reader. So you, as a writer, you have to get used to an instant response. So the comments below your piece are an instant way of finding out if people like or dislike or get angry with what you've said. And so that's been tricky. And I mean, initially, sort of people who signed up to post comments were terribly polite and only said nice things. But now you get the full gamut, and I think this is rubbish too. I think this is brilliant. So it's more like normal social media, I suppose. So there's that. It's quite exposing, I suppose. It's because there's something about writing for print only, which requires someone to then write a letter to the editor or whatever. And there's a distance there. So you're more accountable quickly. And that's no bad thing at all. And sort of marginal reaction is taken a while for everyone, I think, who's been a journalist as long as me, that there's something about seeing your piece in the paper, in the Times. Whereas now we're in a phase where your piece might not get into the paper. It might just be for digital, or it might look differently in the paper to how it looks digitally, and it's presented in a different way. So you need your ego to be kept in check. So if you don't get the full page or the full spread in the paper, that used to be like, oh, what have I done wrong? But now it's just for design purposes. We felt this was more of a digital thing to own and push on digital and so on. And also on digital, things shift around. So you can be the first thing that's the hit on the Times, and then later in the day you'll be quite low down the pecking order. Whereas in the paper, you're in the paper and it's the same, or it's the same forever. When someone finds an old Times, in 20 years' time, it'll still look the same, but it won't look like it did originally on digital. So you have to get used to how you are depicted and portrayed, and how things are illustrated and connected to your piece. That changed as well. But we're all very adaptable. So now I don't think about it at all. Now when someone says, oh, I think this is a digital commission, I don't regard it as put down. It's absolutely fine. In fact, it's almost flipping the other way. That's all that matters, really.
Yeah. And in terms of challenges that you face on a daily basis as a sports writer in the industry, what are some of those biggest challenges, and has that changed since you started off in the industry? Because I was, as part of my course at the News Associates, I did a day on the sports desk of the Times for about 9 months, and I just finished there a couple of months ago. And I was in every Saturday on the sports desk, and I just always found it incredibly fascinating how the likes of yourself and Martin Samuel and all the big writers at the Times are able to produce that much content on a daily basis. Is that something that you ever struggle with, or what other challenges do you ever find creeping up? And is that something that's changed over time or generally stayed the same?
Well, I don't know how to answer that without sounding arrogant, but that's that's part of the attraction of the job. So one of my favorite things is to be already very busy and then asked to do something like reacting to a breaking event and to write about it very quickly. and that's with digital, you need things even faster than before. Unless you were on print deadline, you had all day, didn't you? But now a story can break at any time of day, and you've got to be there quickly with it. I won't generally anymore do the news piece, but I might do the analysis piece or comment or colour that co-inhabits the space with the news piece. And you need to do it fast. But that's, to me, that's the beauty of the job. I wouldn't work terribly well if I worked on a monthly magazine type thing where you had days and days and maybe a fortnight or even longer to plot something out. Don't mind doing those things as well, but it's that sense of just focusing your mind and the adrenaline going is great. So the more you need to write, the better. And I think it becomes a bit of an addiction, actually. So if you have, like, I've just finished covering Wimbledon, which was a fortnight of a particular bubble, particular way of living. I'd cycle there and cycle back. And you have a desk that you only sit at for 2 weeks a year, which is kind of a weird thing, isn't it? And you see people you only really see for 2 weeks in the year. And there's a strange environment where you might know where your first match starts, but you never know what time it'll finish, and you don't know when the next match will start. And the day becomes very elongated, and you're waiting for the players to come in for their press conference. And before you know it, the day started at 10 a.m. and it's 7:30 or 8 or 9, and you still haven't been able to finish the main piece of the day because everything's just taken far longer than anyone thought it would. But that it's a very intense experience and quite tiring in a strange way. But as soon as it's finished, you have a sort of free afternoon, and you feel sort of empty, and what's the point of anything? I think it probably is an addiction, but for anyone that's done it for as long as me, you just love being asked to do things. So yeah, I think my favorite thing is being really busy and then being asked to do something on top, because the sense of achievement you get when you do what most people say, oh, that sounds impossible. that's great, isn't it? You've achieved something. And I just like it. Like people, I remember I did a world track cycling championships just before 2012, because we were really into our track cycling then, and we knew we were going to win lots and lots of medals. But I didn't know too much about track cycling, so I was sort of doing a sort of crash course on it, and that was the reason for going to the championships, was to sort of get to know how the races worked and who the protagonists were, and so on. And it was a Friday night. We had early deadlines on a Friday night. This is for the paper, and I basically, for a race that lasted 90 seconds, I had to write 900 words in 10 minutes, which sounds stupid, doesn't it? That sounds silly. But the guy who asked me didn't sound like he thought he was asking for anything ridiculous. So I said, well, of course, that's fine. But it's like a miracle happens. So when you're under that much pressure, you access parts of your brain you didn't know you had. So everything I'd read and learned came to the fore. So I could type very quickly with access to this information. In general conversation, I wouldn't have been able to access the information. But under the pressure of deadline, it suddenly appeared in my head. And I was able to do it because there's no choice. And I suppose the two sorts of people, the sort of person who says, sorry, that's too ridiculous and stressful, I don't want to do that. And then there's the person who thinks, well, that's ridiculous, but hey, let's give it a go, see what happens, and has trust in the power of adrenaline. I think the day I run out of adrenaline, I'll have to stop. I'll stop doing at least half of my job, I think. Yeah.
I mean, 900 words in 10 minutes, that's pretty incredible. So it is. And And I want to just touch on, the first stage of you entering the sort of journalistic industry. But I wanted to ask you, is there anything you wish what was sort of better in the industry these days? I mean, are you glad that there has been this transition from digital presence and online, or do you wish it had stayed in print? And what are your views on the industry as a whole? Because although it is getting much better, what is your experience been working in an industry that sort of tends to have largely been dominated by men in the past? And how have you felt, your feelings towards the wider industry these days compared to what it used to be?
Well, it is still largely dominated by men in terms of the written media. I mean, people think it isn't because there is quite a big presence of women who post sports programs, and they do it very well. But they're not, I still walk into a room, if it's a room full of written media, I am the only woman often. That there might be now and again someone who's female as well, but I will often be the only woman. So it really hasn't changed too much, and that surprises me, because when I started and there were very few women, I just sort of assumed that would change over the years, but it hasn't. But there are lots of reasons for that. One is probably because, like, for example, I would let a girl shadow me, and she'd walk into a press conference and think, oh, that doesn't look fun, does it? It's just a big clique of blokes. What I do say to people is the men in it today are much, much nicer than the ones that were there when I started. So I was not welcomed at all, really. People were rarely to my face rude. I mean, they were occasionally, but it was just there was no help offered or words of welcome or anything. So I had the bizarre situation of, if I was abroad with a football club, because they had a match in Europe, the nicest person would be the manager of the football team, because he would see, he could see he was being interviewed by a group of guys, and there was one woman, and he could see, well, she's probably not having a very nice time. And they would always pull me to one side and check I was okay and so on. So that just seems to me hugely ironic that the kindest people were the football managers who normally try and keep a distance from the media. But it's not like that now. And if anyone watches this who's a woman and is thinking she'd like to be a sports journalist, the guys are much more welcoming, much more welcoming than they were back in the day 30 years ago. So that's changed. The numbers haven't changed.
Is that something that you struggled with at the beginning of your career?
No, not at all. Not at all. I mean, I wish I had. I wish I'd got more cross about it or whatever. I just didn't. I really didn't care, because I was doing a job I really wanted to do.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure. Before I started sport, I did work briefly in financial journalism. Now, although there were quite a lot of women who were journalists, the people you were dealing with or interviewing were all male. And so I got used to being in a room, like a boardroom, all male, all staring at you like you're an alien, because you're the first woman they even said you're the first woman to walk into this room. It's ridiculous. So I was used to old-fashioned attitudes to where women were expected to be. So it's just like shifting into another world, but a much nicer world from my point of view. I didn't really have much interest in finance. So it was a win-win for me. I was used to men being uncomfortable in the presence of women, but I was writing about something that I had much more passion about. So life was better. And I mean, the patterns became fairly obvious very quickly. What the old cohort used to do would be to ignore me in the group, but if I was on my own with them, say we accidentally left the station to walk to the stadium together, they would unload all their personal problems on me like I was their very best friend, because they didn't have any other women to talk to. And then we'd get to the stadium and then they'd pretend they didn't know who I was. Very strange.
Yeah. I know you say you didn't really care about that sort of stuff back then, but it must take quite a bit of self-confidence and drive and motivation to push through on that and kind of just tunnel vision. You're there to do the job at the end of the day. Is that something that you've always had, in you? Because I read that you graduated from the London School of Economics, and as you said, you went into financial journalism. So have you always had that sort of drive to succeed? And do those outside factors, do they never really have an influence on yourself?
Well, it's hard to self-analyze, isn't it? It felt, in a way, it felt almost natural that I wouldn't be welcomed. I wasn't expecting them, my new colleagues, to rush over and be kind and helpful. I had no expectation of it, so they were just fulfilling what I thought would happen. So therefore, it didn't really bother me. It wasn't like my dreams were crushed. The actual job was as exciting as I thought it would be. How privileged is that to be having seats on the halfway line at a big football match and being asked to tell the world what you thought about it and why the team that won. I mean, that's a privilege. And so the other stuff just felt very minor by comparison. It didn't. Yeah. And also I didn't, I mean, I was confident. I was confident that I could write. And I also played football with men and with women. And these men who were being unhelpful, they didn't play anything. I would often dash to a match after training or something. They weren't doing that. So they did turn around and say to me, "You're a woman, how do you know anything about this?" And I was able to say, well, I played a match last night. I know exactly what it feels like to miss a sitter or whatever. So that did shut them up a bit because they weren't playing.
Is writing something that you always wanted to do?
Yeah. I suppose so. Maybe. Yeah, I think so. I was trying to think, when did I first think I wanted to write? Probably always. Yeah, always. And I always loved sport. So combining the two seemed perfect. And I think I wrote 2 novels, and it's amazing how many of my sports journalistic colleagues said, "Oh, I'd like to do that." I just said, well, just got to. It's amazing how many people think they want to write a novel, but they don't actually do it. You've just got to do it. There's nothing stopping you. It's the cheapest thing to do. Just do it. But a lot of people just get scared of, sitting down and actually writing the thing. So that was the writing. I bring that up because, yes, it's not just journalism. It's writing. Writing is a beautiful thing. Yes. So yes, always. But I can't pinpoint a moment or anything for you. I think it's just there.
It just happened quite naturally, would you say?
Yeah. Just. Yeah. I just liked, if we had, like, at school, if there was an exam, I relished the having to think about a piece of creative writing quickly. I like that, which is an early indication of why you make a decent journalist, I think.
Yeah, and I mean that's really pretty much sums it up, because if you have that at such a young age, then, and it sort of happens naturally, it seems like it's what you're meant to do at the end of the day. Alyson, I just wanted to, when you first broke into the industry, like, when you first made that step into the industry for the first time, did you know that this is what you were going to be doing, for how many ever years?
No, because I felt really lucky to be paid to be doing it in the first place, and quite insecure about it always carrying on. It's a quite exposing job. You can make a mistake and it's not picked up by the subs, then the world will see that you're a very stupid person. I can't actually think of a big mistake, but it's always there. Maybe that's why you don't make many if you're worried about them. But it's a very competitive area. So I suppose there was always an underlying insecurity that it might not last forever. But I didn't ever think I would be the one that would pull the plug on it. It would only have been someone else pulling the plug on it. So I was keen for it to be a forever job. Yes, absolutely.
And just to finish on this topic, is there anything you would like to see change in the future of the industry, the next 5, 10 or so years, that maybe something that's going on right now that you don't quite agree with? Or is there anything that the industry could be doing better? As we spoke about, there is still a male dominance.
Yeah, I mean, different voices would be good. There's a sort of same oldness to the people who get big space and are regarded as the reliable voices and so on. And it would be nice to mix that up, for there to be more space given just to new voices, different voices, competing voices, a bit more variety. There's always a danger that things can look stale, I suppose. I mean, overall, I think it's in much better shape, the industry, than I thought it was going to be, given, the explosion of free stuff. But as far as I can tell, there's a younger group of people taking over positions of power on sports desks, and they seem to be keen to do that, to have a wider remit and mix things up. A very tiny example is that this year at Wimbledon, I only mention it because I've just finished Wimbledon, is that we tried to be more thematic with our approach rather than just give readers match reports, which is what we used to do. So, that's really quite dull, just because that's what you've always done. Shouldn't be what you do now. And I like that. I like the fact that, I'm there as part of a change in the type of coverage. And that can, more of that is good in all areas, I think. I'm a big fan of quirkiness, bravery, and so on. So as long as it's moving in that direction, which I think it is, then I'm happy. I suppose, like anything, things don't happen overnight.
I think that's really well said. I think it is moving in the right direction, but there still is opportunity for, different voices to be heard right up at the top, perched at the top of journalism, Alyson. I have to ask you, I'm a fellow Liverpool fan. I know you're a Liverpool fan. I read one of your stories back from May 2024, our special road trip to see Jurgen Klopp at Anfield one last time with Tony Cascarino, who I've met very briefly from my work at TalkSport, and he's a really, really nice guy. And the objective of the story is Tony Cascarino wants to go and ask Jurgen Klopp one more question before he leaves as Liverpool manager. And he asked him, what does it take to be a Liverpool manager? I wanted to ask you about Liverpool and about Jurgen Klopp. What has it been like reporting on them in the last couple of seasons, and your interactions with Jurgen Klopp? How have they been?
Mostly funny. He's very funny to deal with. I don't deal with him on a regular basis because I don't work on Merseyside. But I can tell you he's every bit as wacky and eccentric and enthusiastic, sort of when the microphones are off, because when the microphones are on, he just lives and breathes the job. And that's the reason he had to go, because I think he took it, every element of it, so seriously. And when Tony asked him that question, he did look like he was trying really hard to answer it honestly. I put him in the category of managers who always try and answer the question. And it doesn't matter what the question is, whether it's left field or stupid or odd or incisive. or provoking, there are some managers who will always try and answer, and he is one of those. And basically what I came away with from that road trip with Tony was, because we talked about it as we drove away back to London, was just that being manager of Liverpool successfully is like being manager of a small country, and you're the head of state and you represent people of Liverpool, not just the football team, because there's another football team. It's not that. It's that your sort of politics and philosophy and your cultural references and your demeanor, personality, and the way you interact with people. To be successful, all those things have to work. So he can't walk grumpily down to the beach with his dog. He has to walk with a smile on his face.
A big smile on his face.
Exactly. But and that's his natural demeanor. But yeah, if you're never allowed an off day, that's exhausting. It's just an exhausting, being loved is exhausting. Being someone that the fans regard as extra special is exhausting, because once you're regarded as extra special, that you're daily, by minute having to live up to that. And everyone's commented of now he's left, he looks healthier and his eyes are sparkling again. I'm not saying he didn't, and he says it was a huge privilege, but I just think, wow, the toll that must take on you, not only to to guide a football club to as many trophies as you can, whilst doing so in an entertaining manner, but also to be sort of this head of state role is quite something. So I don't begrudge him at all the decision to leave, albeit it does leave the club in slight sense of, oh, what now? No,
do you think he'll take the England job?
It'd be mad to do that, because it brings back all the things I just said.
That's exactly what I think as well.
You're just doing. You're not really managing many games at all. You're just being this figure, this state figure. No, I think the pressures of that would be silly to take on board, having found them ultimately stressful at Liverpool. And also, I don't really agree with someone taking charge of England who isn't English. It sort of feels like cheating, really. What's the point of having international football if you're a leading nation and you need to go to another nation for your coach? Yeah, England have to get to grips and produce better coaches.
Just to finish off, I want to ask this from a journalistic point of view and as a fan. How do your preparations look going into the new season? And what do you think of Liverpool under Arne Slot?
I have absolutely no idea how Arne Slot's going to do it. I think part of me thinks, why does anyone think they can step into the shoes left behind by Jurgen Klopp? I don't know. I don't know. I think that's a very tricky thing to do. Really tricky. He seems incredibly laid back, and maybe that's the key to it. Maybe he's refusing to acknowledge the weight of all this, but and maybe it's a good thing. Maybe if all Liverpool fans feel a little bit nervous about the change, then he can only succeed, because we're not expecting too much. I'm not expecting miracles. So if it's a great start to the season, then brilliant. It'll be a nice surprise. But it's been very quiet, hasn't it, out of Anfield? Really quiet in terms of links with players and stories about what his management's like. Not seen much at all, really. So we'll probably get to know him quite slowly through the press conferences and work out what sort of bloke he is, what his man management style is, what it looks like on the pitch, who he picks, puts where, and so on. Just it's a wait and see operation, but it's a clean slate for me. I have relatively low expectations, but not ridiculously low. But I'm not expecting. I just think, wow, to take the job after Jurgen Klopp, it's just almost foolhardy, really. And the season as a whole, I used to bump into journalists who would say to me, they've been doing the job 20 years or something, and they'd lost their love for it. They didn't really. And I still see people occasionally, and they'll go, Stamford Bridge again or whatever. I'm ridiculously excited when I get what match I'm doing next. It's like I have like hundreds of Christmases a year, because I rarely ever request a match. I never demand a match. So I am at the mercy of where the desk want to send me. And wherever it is, I always think, oh, it's exciting.
Yeah, Alyson, that's a perfect way to wrap this up. I really appreciate your time, and I'm also really looking forward to reading everything on the new season, about Arne Slot, Liverpool, and the Premier League. So I really appreciate it.